There's our guy squeezing out another
Turn for the playlist, is it?
Was that
Not so smart now, Theory Man. So this is where your scripts come from.
I'm just gonna keep going.
I've heard of lore dumps, but this is getting ridiculous. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Film Theory, the show that, believe it or not, is able to produce more than 5 episodes per year. Suck on that, traditional entertainment. And in case you overlooked the title, thumbnail, opening gag, and title screen, we're back to continue talking about Rick and Morty. Because, you know what? I like it. You guys clearly like it, and we only get 5 of these this year, so might as well make them count. Season 4's second episode, The Old Man in the Seat, was everything we love about this show. A perfect blend of cerebral existentialism and poop jokes, lore drops, and other droppings. And while we've already seen a range of emotions from Rick Sanchez, from sad Rick to angry Rick to bored Rick to pickle Rick, this episode managed to show us a new side of his personality, as well as allude to details from his past, which remains more elusive than a Jerry at a Mensa meeting. It's worth talking about this episode in particular because the glimpses we get into Rick's psyche are likely to set the pace for what we can expect from this character throughout the rest of the season, while also helping to clear up a lot of misconceptions I think people have about Rick as a character. So to recap, in the episode, Rick announces that he's going to be taking a solo adventure.
I've got a quick solo adventure to go on, and this one will not be directed by Ron Howard.
Summer reveals that he's actually going to poop, and that Rick is, believe it or not, a shy pooper who flies all the way to an idyllic, isolated planet to poop on the porcelain throne of his dreams. He finds, though, that someone else has been visiting his Oval Office, and he sets out to kill them. In case you missed this one, Rick trying to keep anyone else from pooping on his toilet is a metaphor for him trying to keep other people away from his personal life, keeping them at arm's distance from anything that feels intimate. Obvious metaphor was pretty obvious, but, you know, wanted to make sure that we were all starting with the same baseline. After a bit of detective work, Rick discovers the identity of the trespassing pooper, an alien office worker named Tony. Rick's plan to kill Tony, though, changes once Rick finds out that Tony's wife is dead.
Can I look at a photo of my wife while you kill me? She's dead, and I don't mind joining her.
Rick experiences a sudden and uncharacteristic change of heart and leaves a fart bomb instead of outright killing Tony. But why? Well, we're gonna come back to that. In the meantime, Tony can't seem to let the toilet go and invades Rick's private domain yet again. Here, Tony shows that he's no dum-dum by explaining to Rick why he's a shy pooper.
You know what shy pooping is, Rick? It's a pointless bid for control. You want to take the one part of life that you truly think is yours, and you want to protect it from a universe that takes whatever it wants. It took my wife. It clearly took something from you.
Again, explaining the reason Rick likes to be the only person on the entire planet while he's pooping is because it's the only way he feels safe and in control. Rick knows that there are infinite planets and universes and realities, and that everything happening in them is chaotic and random. So having his special poopy time is the only thing Rick can really control in the end, when his past and future are so out of his hands. It's a frustration that he's talked about in past episodes, specifically the season 3 episode ABCs of Beth.
The universe is basically an animal. You know, smart people get a chance to climb on top, take reality for a ride, but it'll never stop trying to throw you. And eventually it will.
But here it's made even more clear. So the episode escalates when Rick places Tony in a version of the Matrix designed to create a heaven-like experience.
The chemical is globophin. It connects the whatever you want section of your brain to the whatever you have section.
In other words, Rick gives Tony everything that he could have ever wanted, an ideal existence, and Tony's mind rejects it. This is because Tony can't accept his own happiness. He's scared off from it, forcing him to be miserable. Sound familiar? It should, because that's exactly how Rick operates. Rick is a man who can
Make a perfectly realized toilet-filled simulation of heaven.
But the one thing he can't make, the one problem he can't figure out, is how to be happy. It's ironic. He's the smartest man in the universe who can become a pickle or travel to infinite realities, but he's miserable, and there's no way that he can science his way out of it. It's something that he actually addresses to Beth during season 3.
Am I evil?
Worse, you're smart. When you know nothing matters, the universe is yours. And I've never met a universe that was into it.
And so finally, Rick has found Tony, someone who's as unable to accept happiness as Rick is. Unlike all the others in the simulation pods, Tony rejects a perfect life, which simultaneously makes Rick feel more connected to Tony, but at the same time pisses him off. So as a final bid to push Tony out of his life, Rick tries to pull off an epic prank by feeding Tony a laxative, only to discover that Tony's died while out living life to the fullest. Rick offers his condolences as a generous gift to his family, while also denying that the two were ever friends.
Hey, Tony's dad, this is 8 billion in your local currency, and this is a kit you can use to clone a new son. He's not my friend.
As Rick mourns the loss of his not friend Tony, he sits down on the toilet, triggering the trap that he had set. Another epic prank that involves 1,000 holograms of Rick pointing and laughing at him. Rick sits on his porcelain throne, the king of loneliness.
Enjoy using it all by yourself while you sit there and think about how nobody wants to be around you and how you ruined it for yourself because you're a huge piece of shit.
Now, the show in this episode isn't exactly subtle with its metaphors and messaging, but there's still a lot to tease out. Fundamentally, this episode is all about the ways Rick keeps the people around him at a distance. The way Rick behaves now is fundamentally influenced by his past, just like Tony's life is influenced by the loss of his wife. When Tony mentions that loss, it sparks a complete change of heart in Rick, indicating that Tony's story has struck a chord. Rick has also experienced a great loss. That's what's caused them both to be shy poopers. Now, up to this point, the truth about Rick Sanchez's past has been the show's greatest mystery. Why was Rick out of Beth's life for so many years? Where is Beth's mother, and what did Rick do to her? We know based on the existence of Beth that she must have existed at some point, right? Well, anyone who knows this show well will immediately jump back to one of its most iconic episodes, Season 3, Episode 1, Rick Shank Redemption, which was all about chonies and memory hopping. In Rick Shank Redemption, Rick dives into memories to show us, and a Gromflemite investigator, the day that a younger Rick Sanchez had to tragically watch his partner Diane die. Except, as Rick later tells us, this isn't a real memory. It was just a
Totally fabricated origin story.
Now, while the memory itself may definitely be fabricated, there is some real-world science that allows us to theorize about whether it's actually that far from the truth. It turns out that humans are really bad at coming up with original ideas. In fact, many neuroscientists believe that new ideas don't even exist. Instead, our brains are constantly remixing everything that we hear, feel, smell, or taste. Researchers at the University of Haifa found that when forming an original idea, the brain utilizes an associative region, which is what we think of as our creative thinking. What's interesting, though, is that this associative part of the brain still fundamentally involves recombining ideas that are already stored inside the brain. What we think of as coming up with new ideas is actually just remixing old ideas in new ways. This was actually confirmed by researchers at the Institute of Psychology of the University of Graz, Austria, who confirmed that coming up with a new idea and recalling an old memory actually show similar activation patterns in the brain. That's not to say that we can't remix ideas to come up with stuff that's incredibly innovative. It just means that in Rick Shank Redemption, there's a pretty good likelihood that Rick's fabricated memories are actually based on some very real-world experiences. So let's look at that fabricated memory again. Diane and Beth both die by Rick's own hand. Another Rick visits him from a different timeline, offering him the opportunity to be a god.
Pass. Excuse me? Who do you think you are? A different kind of Rick, I guess. Well, we'll see how long that lasts.
When our Rick rejects the offer, a bomb drops into the garage, sent via portal to kill off his family. We can assume that this was sent by the other Ricks to set our Rick on the quote-unquote right path. Now, we know that this isn't what really happened to Diane. As Beth says in the episode Rick Potion number 9,
Do you think Grandpa Rick had something to do with this?
It's not fair to assume that, Summer.
Give me a break. He is a selfish, irresponsible...
But
And he left my mother. A real man stands by his woman.
So while the faked memory may not be how it actually went down, in a symbolic sense, it shows us that Rick blames himself and his work for pushing Diane and Beth out of his life. While it's exciting to imagine this being caused by sci-fi hijinks, the reality here is probably more mundane, and thus all the more infuriating for Rick. Diane died in his life because Rick's drive to be the best scientific mind pushed her away, and in the process, he lost the relationship with the one and only thing that could grant him true happiness, his family.
He realized long ago that the greatest thing he'd ever create was his daughter. Come home to the impossible flavor of your own completion.
There are a lot of other analysis channels and articles that have tried to diagnose Rick with some sort of mental disorder, often settling on diagnoses like narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder. But this episode shows that we can flush both of these diagnoses right out. Although Rick sees himself as the smartest person in the galaxy and seems to lack empathy, he doesn't actually have narcissistic personality disorder. It's more that he's suppressed his empathy, probably because he himself views it as toxic, as we saw in the episode Rest and Ricklaxation. As much as Rick might hate it, he does care for his grandson. So much so that even the seemingly hateful, toxic version of Rick is willing to abandon his destructive quest in order to save Morty.
All right, knock it off. You're not impressing anyone. Morty, not that I give a poopy, but are you okay?
Likewise, Rick doesn't suffer from antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy either, which is characterized by a complete lack of remorse for all your actions. Now, while it might not seem like it at first glance, Rick Rick constantly experiences remorse throughout the series. For starters, his alcoholism alone is clearly self-medicating to cope with feelings of existential loss and unhappiness. In The Old Man in the Seat, he attempts to make right by Tony by extending a well-meaning offer of kindness to his father. Rick is even willing to put Morty's life above his own, as we see in A Wrinkle in Time when Morty loses his time-stabilizing collar and Rick takes off his own collar to give Morty a way out of a certain death situation.
I'm okay with this. Be good, Morty. Be better than me.
These are hardly the actions of a narcissist or psychopath. So then how do we explain Rick's clear and intentional acts of cruelty towards Tony if Rick is so desperate for a friend and isn't actually a psychopath? Well, it's actually really easy, much more mundane, and tremendously sad. Anger, hostility, lashing out at those who are closest to us, they're all common but under-talked about symptoms of depression, which comes from our own feelings of being inadequate. Those of us who are depressed often hurt the people that are closest to them, because deep down they believe that they're undeserving of love or happiness. Their hostility pushes other people away, thereby confirming their own feelings of inadequacy. There have also been a number of reports on the fact that we're most aggressive towards the people we love because those are the ones who are most in a position to hurt us. Taking these ideas and applying them to Rick, it becomes clear why he reserves the cruelest of his insults for his grandkids. When it comes to Jerry, Rick barely expresses more than minor annoyance. And when it comes to people Rick actually hates, he's content to kill him without insult, even letting him have the last laugh. Dr. Ben Zeev from the University of Haifa notes in his book, The Subtlety of Emotions, that another reason for hurting those closest to us is a wish for more dependency and attention. Could Rick's cruelty actually be a bid for attention? Well, his catchphrase is,
Wubba lubba dub dub!
which we're told means,
I am in great pain. Please help me.
so yeah, I'd say we're barking up the right tree. So when Rick arranges elaborately cruel pranks to play on Tony, what he's really saying is, pay attention to me, because secretly, that's what I really want. Tony understands that cry for help and is thus his friend. And interestingly enough, there's one final twist here, because when you apply this same logic to the members of his family, we come up with Rick's favorite co-star being Summer. And if you look at what actually happens in the episodes, it makes total sense. It's Summer who joins Rick in getting all roided up and punching the devil. It's Summer who goes native in their Mad Max adventures in Rick Mancing the Stone, to the point where Rick specifically compliments her on her creative use of his booze.
Summer for the win!
It's Summer who recognizes Tiny Rick's downward spiral in Big Trouble in Little Sanchez.
Thanks, kids. You figured it out. Well, Summer did.
And it's the reason she's the failsafe when it comes to Morty's mind blowers. And yet, we get some of the worst insults reserved for her.
Get out of here, Summer! You ruined the season 4 premiere!
Rick actively excludes her from missions despite the fact that she's undoubtedly smarter and more capable than Morty. She's even saved Rick's life on multiple occasions. And like Tony, he can't kill her and he can't get rid of her in his life, so he actively undervalues and insults her, tries to push her away and keep her at arm's distance. But Summer sticks around. She lets it roll off her. She recognizes what her grandpa is really doing, and she's able to dish back. Summer's been playing a more active role in a lot of the episodes that have been coming out over the last season and a half. So maybe with Rick forced to confront more of his emotional hang-ups, Summer will ultimately end up being the key to unlock it all. Only time will tell if that's just a theory. A film theory. And